The first time I saw June Keller walk through my field of lavender, I mistook her for a mirage. That's what 20 years of solitude does to you. Makes you disbelieve in flesh and blood when it's standing right in front of you. She moved like she had all the time in the world, tall and graceful, one hand trailing through the purple blooms, the other clutching a leather portfolio. I remember thinking her fingers looked like they belonged on a pianist, not a woodworker. It's strange to think that was only 2 years ago. Strange how time compresses and expands when you're finally living again after just surviving for so long. I'd been alone on this farm for 5 years by then. Alone with my bees and my flowers, and the ghost of Richard's promises. 5 years of building something that was entirely mine from the ashes of a 20-year relationship that ended with a note on our kitchen table. I need to find myself. Don't try to contact me. As if 2 decades together could be severed with 14 words scrawled on the back of our electric bill. I suppose I should thank him now. Had he stayed, June never would have happened. That day was unusually warm for early May in Vermont. I'd been up since dawn, transplanting seedlings in the greenhouse, my hands caked with soil, my hair a wild nest of gray curls escaping from a bandana. I didn't hear her car come up the gravel drive, didn't notice her, until she was halfway across the lavender field, pausing occasionally to take pictures with her phone. "Can I help you?" I called out, wiping my hands on my overalls. My voice sounded too loud, even to my own ears. I'd gotten used to only speaking to my bees. She turned, shielding her eyes from the sun, and smiled. That smile. God, I still feel it in my chest when I think about it. Like suddenly discovering an extra chamber in your heart. I hope so, she said, walking toward me. I'm looking for Bethany Cross. I called yesterday about sustainably harvested wood. That's me. I extended my soil-stained hand and then pulled it back, embarrassed. Sorry, I'm a mess. She took my hand anyway, her grip firm and sure. June Keller. And believe me, I'm usually the one apologizing for my hands. Permanent wood stain. She turned her palms up, showing off the deep amber resin embedded in the lines of her skin. Guitar maker, I said, remembering our brief phone conversation. Guilty as charged. She grinned, and I noticed a small gap between her front teeth that made her look younger than she probably was. I've been searching for the right source for my tonewood, someone who cares about the land. I nodded, suddenly conscious of how I must look. 50 years old, sun-weathered, probably with dirt on my face. Well, you've come to the right place. I don't let just anyone cut trees on my property. I can see that. Her eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, like her hands, I thought, surveyed the farm. This place feels intentional, like every plant is exactly where it's supposed to be. Something warm uncurled in my chest at her observation. It had been so long since anyone had seen the purpose behind my work. Would you like a tour? I offered, surprising myself. I generally kept to myself, preferring the company of my flowers and bees to most humans. But there was something about June that made me want to show her everything. I'd love nothing more. I showed her the orchard first, the apple and pear trees that provided food for both me and my bees. Then the greenhouse with its riot of seedlings preparing for summer. The beehives humming with activity against the northern tree line. And finally, the small stand of hardwoods at the eastern edge of my property. These are what you're interested in, I said, placing my hand on the trunk of a maple that had fallen during a winter storm. I don't cut living trees, but I salvage what nature brings down. That winter, we lost 3 good maples and an oak. June knelt by the fallen maple, running her hands over the exposed grain where I'd cut away a section of bark. Her touch was reverent, almost intimate. Beautiful, she murmured. The tight grain pattern here. This would make incredible back and sides. She looked up at me. How long has it been seasoning? About 16 months. I keep the cut sections in a special drying shed. Would you like to see? She stood, brushing wood chips from her knees, and I noticed how tall she was, at least 5 inches more than my own 5'4". Lead the way. The drying shed was my sanctuary, the place where I did my own wood carving during the winter months when the farm demanded less of my attention. The air inside was cool and fragrant, with the scent of cedar and maple. Narrow windows allowed thin ribbons of light to illuminate the stacked wood, all carefully tagged and dated. June moved through the space like she was in a cathedral, touching each piece with those long, stained fingers, occasionally closing her eyes, as if listening to something only she could hear. "You can tell a lot about wood by how it sounds," she explained, tapping a maple slab with her knuckles. "Each piece has its own voice, even before it becomes an instrument." I watched her, fascinated by her focus, by the gentle way she handled each section of timber. No one had ever appreciated my wood stores this way. "How did you get into guitar making?" I asked, leaning against my workbench. "By accident, really." She smiled, still examining the maple. "I was a musician first, bluegrass mainly. My guitar neck warped during a humid summer tour, and I couldn't afford to replace it. So I taught myself to fix it. One thing led to another, and 10 years later, here I am, obsessing over wood grain in a beautiful woman's drying shed." I felt heat rise to my cheeks at the casual compliment. Had she just called me beautiful? It had been so long since anyone had looked at me that way that I wasn't sure I could trust my own interpretation. "Do you still play?" I asked, deflecting. "Hi, every day. You can't make guitars if you don't understand how they're meant to feel, how they're meant to sound." She straightened up. "And you? Any musical inclinations?" I laughed. "I listen. Does that count? I have a decent vinyl collection, mostly folk. I go to the Burlington Folk Festival every year. A woman after my own heart." June's eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "Maybe I'll play for you sometime." The way she said it, like a promise rather than a possibility, made my heart flutter in a way it hadn't in decades. We spent hours in that shed, talking about wood and music and sustainable farming. She told me about her workshop in New Haven, the small batch of custom guitars she made each year, her commitment to using only ethically sourced materials. I told her about my journey from high school biology teacher to flower farmer, how I'd inherited the land from my aunt, how Richard had never understood my connection to it. The sun was setting by the time we emerged, the sky painted in strokes of pink and gold over the green mountains. I hadn't meant to talk so long, hadn't meant to mention Richard at all. I've taken up your entire day," June said, looking genuinely apologetic. "I enjoyed it," I admitted. "It's usually just me and the bees for conversation." "Well, I'm definitely interested in your maple, and the cherry you showed me. Would it be all right if I came back next weekend to select the specific pieces?" Of course," I said too quickly. Then, trying to sound more professional, "I mean, yes, that would be fine. I'm here most weekends." June reached into her back pocket and pulled out a business card. "My number, in case anything changes." Our fingers brushed as she handed it to me, and I felt that touch all the way to my toes. As I watched her drive away, her ancient Subaru kicking up dust on my gravel road, I felt something shift inside me, like soil being turned over after a long winter, exposing something fertile and long buried to the light. I didn't expect her to come back. Or rather, I didn't trust that she would. Richard had taught me that lesson well. People leave. But the following Saturday, there she was again, this time with a small handplane and a notebook, ready to select her wood. And the Saturday after that, she came with no pretense at all, just a thermos of coffee and a proposition to listen to records in my living room while it rained. By her fourth visit, we both stopped pretending it was about the wood. On her fifth visit, she brought her guitar, a beautiful instrument with a spruce top and rosewood back that gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight. We sat on my porch, overlooking the wildflower meadow as it swayed in the summer breeze. When she played, her whole body seemed to become part of the music, shoulders rocking, head bent close to the strings as if she were whispering secrets to them. I closed my eyes and let the notes wash over me. Some old ballad about lost love found again. Her voice was like her hands, strong, sure, textured with something rich and amber. When I opened my eyes, she was watching me, her fingers still moving over the strings. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You look peaceful," she said simply. "It suits you." Later that night, after too much wine and too many confessions, she kissed me in my kitchen. I was washing dishes, hands deep in soapy water, when I felt her presence behind me. She smelled like rosewood and something citrusy. Bergamot, maybe. Bethany, she said. Just my name, nothing more. I turned, wiping my hands on a dish towel, and found her standing closer than I expected. At 50, I thought I was long past the butterflies, past the trembling anticipation of a first kiss. I was wrong. She took the dish towel from my hands and set it on the counter. Then she cupped my face with those beautiful, stained hands and looked at me, really looked at me, like she was memorizing every line, every freckle, every strand of silver in my hair. Is this okay? She whispered. 20 years with Richard, and he had never once asked, had never once looked at me with such focused attention. I nodded, unable to speak, and she leaned down, pressing her lips to mine with exquisite gentleness. I'd forgotten how it felt to be kissed like that, like you were something precious, something worth savoring. Or maybe I'd never known at all. When she pulled back, I was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of feeling so much after so long, feeling nothing. Stay, I said, finding my voice at last. Please stay. And she did. That night and many nights after. Summer bled into fall, and we fell into a rhythm. Weekdays apart. Her building guitars in New Haven, me tending my farm in Burlington, and weekends together. Sometimes at my place, sometimes at hers. She built me a bee house in her backyard so I'd feel at home. I carved her a guitar pick from applewood that she kept on a leather cord around her neck. It wasn't perfect. We argued about small things, her perpetual lateness, my stubborn independence. She thought I worked too hard. I thought she took too many risks with her business. But even our arguments felt like a gift after the polite silence that had defined the last decade of my marriage. The first real test came in October, when she was invited to a prestigious guitar showcase in Nashville. 3 weeks apart, the longest since we'd met. Come with me, she urged, her head in my lap as we sat on her porch swing. I ran my fingers through her short black hair, noticing the new strands of silver at her temples. I can't leave the farm that long, not with winter preparations. Hire help. It's not that simple. I sighed. The farm is me, June. I'm the farm. She sat up, her eyes serious. No, you're not. You're Bethany Cross. The farm is part of you, but it's not all of you. Her words hit a nerve. Wasn't that exactly what Richard had complained about? That I'd become so entangled with this place that there was nothing left for him? I need to finish the winter preparations, I said firmly. You go to Nashville, sell some beautiful guitars. Call me every night. She did call. Every night for 3 weeks, she called and told me about the musicians who played her instruments, the orders she'd received, the connections she'd made. I listened and missed her and wondered if this was the beginning of the end. If her world, expanding beyond New Haven, would eventually expand beyond me too. The day she was due back, I was in the greenhouse, preparing cuttings for spring, trying not to check the clock every 5 minutes. When I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, I forced myself to finish the row I was working on before going outside. June was leaning against her Subaru, looking tired but happy, a guitar case in one hand and a small package in the other. I brought you something, she said, holding out the package as I approached. Inside was a delicate wooden pendant, a perfect miniature honeybee carved from pale maple, suspended on a silver chain. I met a woodcarver in Nashville, she explained, helping me fasten it around my neck. He taught me how to do the detailed work. It took me 6 tries to get it right. I touched the pendant, speechless. The thought of her, surrounded by music and opportunity and new faces, spending her free time learning to carve something just for me. It undid something tight and fearful in my chest. That night, tangled in my sheets, her body warm against mine, I finally said the words I'd been holding back. I love you. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at me in the dim light. I've loved you since I saw you standing in that lavender field, looking like you grew right up out of the earth. I laughed through sudden tears. That's the most ridiculous thing anyone's ever said to me. Doesn't make it less true. She traced my cheekbone with her thumb. You're the most authentic person I've ever known, Bethany Cross. How could I not love you? Winter came, harsh and beautiful. June spent more time at my farm than her apartment, helping me with repairs to the greenhouse, playing her guitar by the wood stove in the evenings. We fell into a contentment I hadn't believed possible anymore. Until the letter came. Richard's lawyer, not Richard himself. A sterile document explaining that my ex-husband needed to sell his half of the farm. He was getting remarried, starting a new life in Portugal, needed capital for a vineyard venture. 20 years together, 5 years of silence, and now this. A legal threat to the only home I'd ever truly loved. I tried to hide my panic from June, but she knew me too well by then. "Talk to me," she said, finding me sitting on the porch steps late one night. The letter crumpled in my fist, despite the bitter cold. So I told her everything. How Richard and I had purchased the farm together, though it had always been more my dream than his. How, legally, he still owned half of it, even though he'd walked away. How I didn't have the money to buy him out, and without that, we'd be forced to sell. "How much does he want?" June asked, her voice carefully neutral. I named the figure, a sum so large it made my stomach twist. June was quiet for a long moment, her breath making clouds in the cold air. "I have money," she said finally, "from the Nashville showcase, and some savings. Not enough for all of it, but maybe a down payment. We could get a loan for the rest." "We?" I stared at her. "June, this isn't your problem." "Isn't it?" She took my cold hands in her warm ones. "I love you. I love this place. That makes it my problem, too. I can't let you do that. We've been together less than a year." She looked out over the snow-covered fields, the moonlight turning everything to silver. "My whole life, I've been waiting for something to feel like home. My parents moved us every few years. Then I was touring, living out of a van. Even my apartment in New Haven. It's just a place I keep my tools." She turned back to me, her eyes fierce and certain. "This is home, Bethany. You are home. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let Richard take that away from either of us." We stayed up all night, making plans, running numbers, arguing and reconciling. By morning, we had a strategy. June would provide part of the money. I would sell 5 acres of the undeveloped woodland, land I loved but could part with if it meant keeping the heart of the farm. Together, we'd apply for a small business loan, positioning the farm and June's guitar business as complementary ventures. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the first time in my life I'd faced a crisis with a true partner by my side. The next 6 months were a blur of paperwork, bank meetings, lawyers, and too many sleepless nights. June temporarily moved her workshop into my barn, commuting to New Haven only when absolutely necessary. I learned to delegate, hiring 2 local teenagers to help with the spring planting so I could focus on the business plan. By summer, it was done. The farm was legally mine, ours. Richard got his money and disappeared back to Portugal. June officially moved in, converting the old tool shed into a proper workshop for her guitars. On the 1-year anniversary of the day we met, I took June to the lavender field where I'd first seen her. The purple blooms were at their peak, buzzing with bees, fragrant in the warm air. "I have something for you," I said, suddenly nervous. From my pocket, I pulled a small wooden box, one I'd carved myself during the long winter nights. Inside was a ring made from the same maple she'd selected on her first visit to the farm, inlaid with a thin band of copper. "Bethany!" she breathed, taking the box with trembling hands. "I'm not asking you to marry me," I clarified quickly. "Not unless you want that. I'm just asking you to keep building this life with me, to make things with me, to grow old with me on this land." June took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. I'd secretly measured while she slept. "Can I still marry you even if you're not asking?" she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Because I'd really like to call you my wife, Bethany Cross." And so, at 51, I found myself planning a wedding. Nothing elaborate, just family and close friends gathered in the wildflower meadow. June's parents flew in from Arizona. My sister came from Maine with her husband and teenagers. June's guitar-making apprentices played music. My beekeeper friends provided honey wine. We wrote our own vows. I promised to remember that I was more than my farm, to make space in my life and heart for her dreams alongside my own. She promised to always come back, no matter how far her work took her, to never let me doubt her love or commitment. As we spoke these promises under an arch of wildflowers, I thought about how different this felt from my first wedding. With Richard, I'd been young, uncertain, compromising parts of myself before I even fully knew who I was. With June, I came as a whole person, meeting another whole person, both of us choosing to grow together, rather than one bending to accommodate the other. That was 2 years ago today. 2 years of learning to share my space, my land, my solitude. 2 years of June's music filling the farmhouse, of her wood shavings mixing with my garden soil, of building something neither of us could have created alone. It hasn't all been lavender fields and love songs. We've fought about money, about time, about the future. June travels more now that her guitars have gained recognition. I still struggle sometimes to let go of control over the farm. But last night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, June's arm warm around my shoulders, I realized something profound. I'm no longer afraid of being left. Not because I believe it can never happen. Life offers no such guarantees, but because I know now that I can survive it. That loving deeply, even with the risk of loss, is infinitely better than the half-life I was living before. June leaned over and kissed my temple. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" she asked. I turned to look at her, at the new lines around her eyes, the increasing silver in her short hair, the hands that have built such beautiful things and touched me with such tenderness. "I'm thinking that I'm glad you needed wood that day," I said simply. She laughed, that rich sound that still makes my heart skip. "I didn't, you know. Need wood, I mean. I had plenty in my workshop already." I stared at her. "What? Then why did you come to the farm?" June smiled, a little sheepish. "I'd heard about your sustainable farming practices from a friend. I was curious. And then I saw your picture on the farm's website, this fierce-looking woman with wild gray curls holding up a frame of honeycomb, and I just had to meet you." "You never told me that," I said, amazed that after 3 years together, she could still surprise me. She shrugged. "Some things you save, like good wood, you know. Wait for the right moment." I laughed and rested my head on her shoulder, watching the fireflies begin to rise from the meadow grass. At 53, I've learned that life rarely gives you what you think you want. Sometimes it gives you something far better, if you're brave enough to let it in. I looked down at our hands, intertwined on the porch swing, her long fingers with their permanent wood stain, my shorter ones with their permanent dirt under the nails. Different hands that had somehow found their way to each other. "Play something for me," I asked. And as the night deepened around us, she did. Her voice and her guitar telling our story far better than words ever could.